Welcome to Divorce Talk Show. I'm Lori McShane, a certified divorce specialist in California real estate. And today, we're exploring the financial realities of a divorce, a topic that can feel overwhelming, but is essential to secure your future. We have a fantastic panel of experts here to guide us through budgeting, asset division, and financial planning strategies. Let's meet our panelists. We have Donald Schweitzer, managing partner at Schweitzer Law Partners and a seasoned family law attorney. We have Jackie Adams-Ings, a CPA specializing in forensic accounting. And lastly, we have John C. Juarez, financial advisor at Edward Jones Investments. We'll dive into each of their specialties. So, stay tuned. And don't forget to visit divorcetalk.show. Submit topics you'd like to see in future episodes. Let's start with the foundation, financial independence. Dawn, can you walk us through why having a clear understanding of alimony, child support, and asset division is so crucial during a divorce?
Yeah, it might be one of the most important things that a person does when going through a divorce is understand how crucial it is, Lori. I mean, what we're talking about is planning for the future, not thinking about the past, because the past isn't going to be relevant anymore. You got two households now, opposed to just one, and there's less resources to go around. And there's going to have to be maybe some planning as to getting back to the point where you're financially comfortable. So the biggest thing that I see that people make mistakes of is thinking they know about the law, how support is calculated, how the property is divided in court, not understanding community property. It's very complex, okay? Support isn't as easy as it seems. And I think that what people should do is sit down with a good attorney, ask the important questions, and have an open mind. Because a lot of times what happens is you read things on the internet or you talk to your friends that have been through a divorce, and you are predisposed to thinking that it's going to work out the way that you want it to work out. Be open to the idea that reality is going to set in. And that's why I love to bring in professionals like these two right here, because what they do for me is they help me educate the clients and help them make really good decisions. A financial advisor is going to be talking about, what are the things that you should be looking for to get the best deal possible. And of course, a forensic accountant is going to make sure that you know what you have, because a lot of times, a family law attorney doesn't have those skills, and the client doesn't know everything about tracing and looking at tax records and all the things that they do. So getting educated at the very beginning is really, really important, and being open to the idea that reality might be different than what you think it is. Would you agree?
I'd agree. Yeah, that's a key point. So many times in my experience, I've had people come in talking to their friends and neighbors, their loved ones who are fighting for them, and not realizing that I certainly can have a different outcome.
Yeah, and lots of factors are needed to be looked at for spousal support, period, child spousal. We have 17 different areas that could affect child and spousal support.
Yeah, and Lori, one of the things that people do is they come into my office, some people, not all of them, but some people come into my office, they say, look, I want an amicable divorce. I don't want to pay a lot of money, but I want everything, right? And you're like, okay, wait a minute, your spouse has a business, right? And how am I going to convince a court what the cash flow available for support is going to be, or what the value of things are going to be, and the tax implications? How am I going to do that without experts? And so another thing people have to do in understanding that you need to bring in some extra people, and don't be penny wise and a pound foolish, because that just doesn't work. And fortunately, most of our clients allow us to bring in the experts to help us.
Well, yeah, I believe you need a team behind you, especially to navigate through this process, because it could go all over the place if it's not handled correctly.
Yeah, not all divorces are complex. I mean, we do a lot of divorces where you don't need experts, but if you're talking about self-employed person,
Mhm.
you know, if you're talking about somebody that's got RSUs, you know, and some complexity, and or you know, a mixture of community and separate property, and you don't know which is which, the attorney, him or herself, can't do that. You need to bring somebody in.
Gotcha.
That would require us
Exactly.
to be able to testify and inform the court of what is separate property, how we arrived at it, what we relied on. Documentation is key.
Gotcha. And Jackie, as a forensic accountant, what role do you play in uncovering hidden assets, and why is this step often overlooked?
It's often overlooked because you believe you're aware of what's going on in your marriage, but not always. We have multiple tools at our disposal for research, for finding hidden assets. Documents, again, are key. We'll analyze bank accounts, securities accounts, and see if there's unknown transfers. Analyze all of the material that's available to determine if we're capturing everything for the division of assets.
Yeah, sometimes what a forensic accountant will do, like Jackie, is she'll say, you know, things just aren't adding up, you know, and then they look closely at the tax returns and they say, hey, Don, bring me the bank statements. Let's see if we could start looking at things a little bit closer, and, you know, they find things for us. It's really interesting, you know, how a spouse could go through a marriage and not have a clue as to the financial aspects because the other person's dominant. Wouldn't you agree with that, John?
Yeah,
See it often. Yes.
Typically, one person kind of handles those finances, the other person handles other household related, child-related issues. But yeah, cash flow is important, and it's important to get a grasp of what's coming in and out. And sometimes we got to pull everything together: statements, bank accounts, look at those deposits and withdrawals.
Yeah. Lori, one of the things that I love to have is a good financial advisor like John here, because what happens is, you know, if you got a marriage of some assets, the decisions that you make could impact you for the rest of your life. You know, like for an example, some people might think it's in their interest to keep the house. That may be true, it may not be true, depending on tax implications and what your affordability is. And these two experts would sit down and kind of give you an idea as to really how much you're going to be walking away with. And then John would plan it out for you, right?
Yeah.
Yep, and even some of the retirement accounts, some are tax deferred, some are tax free. The Roth account, traditional IRA, 401k. Sometimes people just want to, you take yours, I take mine, not realizing the tax implication in the future.
Gotcha. And John, from your perspective, what are some key steps individuals can take to create a post-divorce budget plan for future financial stability?
Yeah, well, you know, divorce process is emotionally and financially draining, and so it's important to get a grasp of the new budget, the individual budget, understanding that cash flow after support implication, whatever that may look like, and then retooling it, right? Looking at those child-related expenses if they exist, what debt you're going to take on, what day-to-day costs you have, and understand what are those new fixed expenses versus those kind of wishes, right? And we got to pay our mortgage or our rent, groceries, but maybe that vacation, maybe we have to wait on. Might have to plan for that, you know, new tires on the car. And so it's important to really understand where that money is coming in and out. And so that's something we help with cash flow statements and budgeting and creating that new individual budget.
Nice.
Yeah, Lori, I think that bringing something like John early on into the proceedings is really important. What I'd like to do, if a client is open to the idea, is to introduce them to a good financial advisor, because right from the beginning, you should be looking at the strategy, right? And when we go to settlement conferences, typically I'm going to have John and my forensic accountant both there sitting there helping us, because that's how complex it could get.
Yeah.
Determining the division and what you're going to be able to experience and receive after the division. A lot of troubles with, you know, taxes and depletion of income itself, and having to cover two households and with the same pot of money.
Another thing that I really like is getting a good forensic accountant will help you settle a case, because typically, like if my client hires Jackie, they're going to know Jackie's like a really good forensic accountant, so they're going to get a good forensic accountant. Next thing you know, they're talking to each other and they're sharing notes, and they usually come in within really close, distance from each other as far as the numbers. There might be a little bit off, but that's the part that's easy to negotiate. So, having Jackie on board, right from the beginning, so they could start collecting the documents and then asking the important questions, and then when she's ready, then we go into a settlement mode.
Gotcha. And that way everybody's on the same page and there's no surprises.
It's amazing how it works.
Right.
I mean,
Yes.
the friends don't argue with what the cash were in the banks were, and things like that. They might talk about whether something's a perquisite or not, but those are usually the smaller issues. So long as you've got somebody really good on your side, and the other side is cooperating with producing documents and everything, usually it's a pretty fair settlement.
Yes, the accountants work together, and then you can identify, okay, these are areas we agree, and then we can limit, when we do get into settlement mode, the few issues that might be all-consuming to finishing it up.
Gotcha. Asset division, such as a primary home, can be one of the most contentious aspects of divorce. Dawn, can you explain how community property laws in California impact the division process?
Yeah, so community property, first let's talk about what the definition is, Lori. Okay, in California, community property means anything that's acquired from the date of marriage to the date of separation. That's presumed, okay? And we're talking about assets and debts. Conversely, anything that's acquired before marriage, assets or debts, or after the date of separation is presumed to be separate. And that's why that date of separation can be so important in a marriage. Now, that sounds pretty simple, right? And one other thing is anything that's received by gift or inheritance is also presumed to be separate property. Okay, simple, right? No, it's not so simple, because sometimes what people do is they change the character of property. A man might come into the marriage with a house and he decides, I love you so much, Jackie, I'm going to put you on title, right? We call that a transmutation. And there's a lot of complexity that goes along with the legality of whether a true transmutation took place. The other thing is that sometimes there's a commingling of assets and money, and we have to determine what's separate from what's community. A wife walks into the marriage and she's got $200,000 sitting in a bank account, and then in the next 10 years she puts her checks in there every month, right? So we've got this mixture, and at the end of it, they're fighting over whether that's community or separate. So we've got a tracing issue. So there's a lot of complexities that are involved in it, but what people should know is that the court is supposed to divide property equally in California, community property. But getting to what it is, whether it's separate or whether it's community, is always going to be a challenge when we're talking about a contentious divorce with a lot of assets. Would you agree, Jackie?
Absolutely. And specific to the residents, it also comes down to capital gains and the tax issue and who's going to receive the house, and if they're able to refinance it. A lot of times the property needs to be refinanced, and maybe the recipient of spousal support doesn't have the income level to qualify to be able to refinance the home and be able to accept that or take that as a community asset that would be part of the division. Ultimately, then it may have to sell.
Yeah, then we get into the really difficult stuff like RSUs, where some property, just by the character and the way that it's distributed, is going to always have a little bit of community and separate. And Jackie's going to figure out that looking forward as to when things vest and when they're actually taken by the person who's earning it. And then John is going to determine whether it's a good deal or not. Do you want to trade that for something? And things of that nature. Retirement plans. Retirement plans are also things that have typically a mixture of community versus separate. So we use an actuary for that. So you can see that even though there's some simplicity to the understanding of what community property is, it gets very complex when life goes on and people are, sharing things.
Yeah.
They'll continue to contribute to their 401k post-separation, even though there may not be a premarital side to it and have separate property at that end of the marriage, but post-separation, a lot of people continue to pay into their 401k and will do what we call a carve-out of community versus separate and the earnings or losses associated with those additional contributions post-separation.
And what about, let's say if the couple decides to put the home for sale, and especially with the capital gains, you get more if you put the home for sale as a couple versus separate, because you get 500, right, deduction for both for a couple, and then you get 250 for individual. So have you guys seen any sale of property, while they're married still, so they can, on the
Absolutely, and
capital
it's
gains?
sometimes recommended so that they can take advantage. I mean, even if one party wants to stay in the home but anticipates selling in a year or two, or maybe 3 or 4 when the children age out or go off to college, it's sometimes still most beneficial to sell it prior to your actual judgment on the marriage. So you can take the whole $500,000 exclusion on the gain to calculate your capital gains tax.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, sometimes the house is too expensive now because you've got people living in 2 separate places usually. The mortgage might be high, and it just doesn't make sense for somebody to be living in a 5 bedroom house anymore with just one child and with this huge mortgage. And you're talking about during the pendency of divorce, we do see people agreeing and sometimes even court orders selling property. And that could be a good thing for the purpose of ending a divorce too, because at the end there's going to be what we call an equalization payment. And what that is we need some cash to be able to equalize what people are getting, because it's supposed to be equal at the end, right? And so that's a great source of cash. And again, that choice as to whether to sell the property or keep it, that's what
That's what John's for.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, very often that's usually one of the larger assets
Yes.
in the estate, and definitely will help free up some cash for that equalizing payment at the end, and again, ensuring that we're dividing and balancing like assets.
And tax consequences on those
Mm-hmm.
assets,
Right.
not trading a regular bank account for a retirement account.
Yeah, the tax implications are something that you don't want to ignore, especially if you're the one that's receiving retirement and you get dinged for pre-withdrawing it before it's time.
Right.
That has to be accounted for in the settlement.
Yeah, if you can't access the money to your 59 and a half versus a liquid account, an investment account, it's a very different type of an asset and different tax implications.
And Jackie, what are common mistakes people make when dividing assets? And is there any way they can avoid them?
First, they don't consult us.
Oh, okay.
They make assumptions about, say, the value of the home or the value of the business, and divide based upon not having the proper information they need to make those decisions.
Gotcha. And John, how can someone plan for the financial impact of taking on, dividing debt and, during a divorce?
Yeah, it's an expensive process. A lot of times the community liquid cash is used during the process, and there's debt left over, right, that needs to be divided. And so just as the assets are divided equally, so is the community debt. And it's a good opportunity. We recommend that debt you're taking on, that you do close joint accounts, open up new individual accounts in your name only. That gives an opportunity to divide that debt into the new accounts. And that's important that for the other spouse that's not responsible for that debt, to get it out of their name. Also gives you an opportunity to refinance debt. And so there's a lot of credit card with high interest rate in today's market, a lot of opportunity to move that over to a 0% interest for 12 to 18 months. And so it gives you an opportunity to really hammer down that debt. And oftentimes we have to work with maybe credit repair companies to refinance that debt, consolidate some of that debt. Again, looking at the cash flow statements to see what type of debt we can actually afford and handle on a month-to-month basis.
You sound like a doctor, a financial doctor. Got to have them.
Yes, definitely got to have a financial planner. Like you mentioned earlier, you got to have your team in the beginning, especially on the financial side and also on the forensic side as well.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's talk about life after a divorce. My favorite. John, what are the key components of a strong financial plan after the divorce is finalized?
Yeah, after everything is divided, the assets are awarded, again, getting a grasp of really what exists, right? What do we have to work with? And then, have an opportunity to redesign your future financial plan. And so we were able to sit down, see where they're starting at, and really what those new individual goals look like, right? And they're able to plan that future individually, particularly the retirement. They're not relying on the other spouse. And that gives a little freedom, believe it or not, to really get a grasp of that financial future, not only for retirement, but how we're going to address maybe college costs, right? And so that might be a plan that we want to put in place. But before we get to those long-term financial goals, it's important also to get the foundation in place, right? Emergency cash. Coming out of that divorce, cash is going to be tight, expenses might increase in the household. And so before we really address the long-term financial planning, we want to make sure, just in case something unexpected happens, we always recommend 3 to 6 months of expenses in a liquid account, maybe a high yield savings money market where it's easily accessible, no penalties, there's no waiting period. And so that's important also to get that emergency cash in place before we start looking at the long-term planning.
Gotcha. And Jackie, what role does ongoing financial tracking play, especially when it comes to alimony or child support adjustments? And, you being a forensic accountant, what advice can you give individuals managing complex, financial documents to, ensure, assets are properly accounted for post-divorce? I know I threw a lot at you.
The one key area that is absolutely required is good documentation. Be sure to keep your documents. The more organized you are, the less expensive it will be for us professionals who have to charge you to go through all these documents. So if the documents are in great order and consistent, then it will save you time and money and a lot of heartache. There's always a lot of emotion relating to support areas and the division and divorce period. Even after divorce, there are mechanisms where you can inquire of the other spouse what their current financial situation is, so that you can determine whether something needs to change and a modification for the support needs to be undertaken.
Speaking of documents too, another area is the estate planning, right? Post-divorce, important to revisit those beneficiaries on your accounts, maybe look at your living trust, your will. That's important, and oftentimes people forget about that. Life insurance policies may be in place, maybe new ones, protecting the support payment, or old policies, and we want to make sure those beneficiaries are also up to date.
Yeah, what John just said makes absolute sense. We tend to ask people right at the beginning of meeting them, do you have any estate planning? That's during our initial consultation. Most people say no. And then I follow up with, you should probably think about it, because of the fact that, you got kids. And if you have existing estate planning, you should probably have it looked at before you file, if you have that luxury, because there's things that you can't do once the divorce starts. But I love that part of it because folks don't think about a divorce being connected to estate planning, but it really is, and that's a good point.
Yeah. Especially if there's minor children involved, decision-making, custodianship, there's blended families, and God forbid there's a death, one of the parents, that could get pretty messy.
And you want to change your estate planning because you don't necessarily want the ex-spouse on it either, right?
Sometimes that's the case. Most of the time. Yeah. Or you may want it.
Okay.
And that's
Right.
okay.
Right.
But it's no longer your spouse.
Right.
But you do want to, and there's different rights, right, that you're entitled to as individuals versus spouses, and we want to make sure that that's clear in that estate plan, if that's the choice.
So do you feel it's smart to redo the wills and redo everything after a divorce?
Not necessarily redo, but certainly revisit.
Revisit?
And amend it, update
Okay.
it. Fortunately, they have something already in place.
Gotcha.
And in fact, you should redo that from time to time anyways, even if you are married.
Gotcha. And this is just a question I just thought about while we were just talking.
Mhm.
So let's say, the spouse, got like an increase in salary and is divorced, from, their partner. Uh, does that partner who's actually collecting alimony get to go back to the court, or do they get to, retry to say, hey, exit is making so much more money. I need this to cover this, this, and that. Did you guys see that?
Yeah,
Mm.
so let me answer that question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jackie because she's going to expound on that. So the answer is it depends. Okay, so it depends on whether or not there's a marital standard of living that can be measured, and whether it's relevant. So let's assume hypothetically that the husband is working at a very modest job, modest income, and suddenly, after he's not suddenly, but after he's divorced, he gets educated and he takes on a profession, and now he's earning 3 times as much as he did during the marriage. So can the ex-spouse, the wife, go in there and say, now I want a huge increase in support because look how much he's making? Well, probably not. But one of the things that Jackie does, which is really cool, is she will, upon request, determine what the marital standard of living is to give people an opportunity to go back into court and say, look, right now we're not meeting it because we've got 2 different households. What I'm receiving in spousal support is nowhere near what the marital standard of living was. He's got a big raise. Now it's time to maybe increase it. So, Jackie, why don't you explain how that works?
Yeah.
There are 2 approaches for the marital standard of living, and it's one of the 17 different factors having to look at for support, 4320 factors. So, but 2 different areas. One, we can look through what type of income did the whole community have, regardless of what they spent it on or who spent it, what kind of income was available to the household to establish the marital standard of living. Then you have rare cases where they don't really have regular recurring income. Say they're live off a trust fund, so they just take money from their trust whenever they need money. So then that's more, and or they're living beyond their means.
Mm.
So there's multiple ways we determine the marital standard of living.
The bottom line is this, though, is that if you're going through a divorce and you hope to be able to make that claim, Lori, make sure that the judgment states that there was a marital standard of living and that the current support does not meet it. Okay, that gives you some room. And ultimately, it's going to be dependent on the judge. Judges in family court have a lot of discretion, so know who you're in front of, before you, or as you're asking that question.
Thank you all for being here. I really do appreciate it. You guys give such a wonderful insight into the transactions and behind the scenes. And also thank you for joining us on this episode of Divorce Talk Show. And I hope our expert panelists have given you valuable insights into navigating the financial complexities of a divorce. And remember, you're not alone. And remember to visit divorcetalk.show and share your thoughts and suggest topics for future episodes in the future. See you next time.